Hey everybody. Okay, this is part 2 of Monday's class. This is about microsociology. So we're going to look at this perspective from the idea that social interaction is in everyday life, okay? Microsociological approach tends to focus on face-to-face social interactions, right? So what people do when they're in the presence of somebody else. Think about that. Symbolic interactionists love this stuff. They like to look at how those symbols are used with people to define their worlds, right? How people look at things, how that affects behaviors, all that stuff. So we're going to dive into this a little bit more because you're going to see things as far as stereotypes, personal space, and touching, okay? Stereotypes, right, are used in everyday life. Those first impressions are shaped by the assumptions one person makes about another person's sex, race, age, physical appearance, whatever it is, right? Those assumptions affect one's ideas about the person and how that one person is going to act toward that particular person. Stereotypes tend to be very self-fulfilling, meaning that they bring about very kinds of behavior that fit that stereotype. They even all have an impact on what we accomplish, right? So people can also resist stereotypes and change those outcomes in that sense. And I'm sure you guys can think of a lot of different stereotypes. I'm attaching a video here that talks about stereotypes a little bit more in that sense. All right. Let's talk about personal space. Okay. Personal space. Oh, here, I want to show you guys this this slide. Again, this is a very self-fulfilling stereotypes, how they work, right? So we see a feature of the person to hear things about that person, and then we fit that into what we see or know about that stereotype. And then how we expect that person to act shapes our attitudes and actions. And then you can see from how we act, that person gets ideas of how we perceive him or her. And then those behaviors of that person changes to match our expectations, and that confirming the stereotype in the sense. Okay? All right, so let's talk about personal space a little bit. Another way symbolic interactionists may look at things is, again, through symbols, one of which is personal space. So it refers to that physical space that surrounds us and that we claim as our own. The amount of personal space varies from one culture to another, right? There's an anthropologist, Edward Hall, who found that Americans use 4 different distance zones within this. Now, given this was all before COVID, so things have varied a little bit in this sense. The first one is intimate distance. Okay. Intimate distance is about 18 inches from the body for lovemaking, wrestling, comforting, and protecting in that sense. The second here is personal distance from about 18 inches to about 4 feet for about friends, acquaintances, and ordinary conversations, right? The third is social distance. Here we're looking from about 4 feet to 12 feet for impersonal or formal relationships like job interviews and that kind of stuff, right? The fourth and final one is public distance. Here we're looking at anything beyond those 12 feet. So even more formal relationships, right? You're speaking to dignitaries, public speakers, and general public kind of format, that kind of thing, right? So that's all important for us to look at. From our culture, we learn about these rules, right? So again, those 4 that sort of differ, those distance zones are sort of important. Think about it. If somebody who was not your boyfriend or girlfriend or your partner in that sense, right? Would you not maybe be standing as close to them or maybe touch their arm or their hand or something in those moments, right? We meet people off the street all the time or are introduced to other people, right? Our public distance and our space looks very different. Have you ever stood in a line like an amusement park and then be like, wait a second, I don't feel so comfortable. I'm really smushed up to this person. Or maybe even on a plane, right? It's that personal space. You're like, I need my bubble. That's what we're talking about here. That personal space is so very important. Another way in which it's important, and think about it, we learn these rules by touching. Both the frequency and the meaning of touch vary from one culture to the next. So men and women react differently to being touched. If somebody were to come up and hug you, would you feel comfortable with that? Or would you be like, taking that step back? We protect our personal space a lot of times. Another way in which we protect our personal space is by controlling that eye contact. That eye contact is so very important. Have you ever had somebody that they don't look away from you whatsoever? Like they're sort of boring into you with their eyes. Does that make you comfortable or not? Sort of an interesting concept, because some of you might be like, that might make me extremely uncomfortable. Somebody else I really like eye contact. That suits me well in job interviews and in certain environments. Eye contact is another way that's so extremely important to us. All right. Derogatory. Here, this is an analysis of how we present ourselves in everyday life. Okay. So derogatory is the name that was given to an approach by Erving Goffman. Again, we're talking about Erving Goffman here. Really a pioneer in a lot of things with sociology. But he looked at social life through the terms of a drama or the stage. So think of a play or an act, right? Goffman said socialization prepares people for learning to perform on the stage of everyday life. Okay, so we have a front stage where the performances are given, right? Our lines are being delivered. This is how we want people to perceive us, right? Then we have a backstage. This is where people rest from their performances, discuss their presentations, and plan future performances, right? So when we go home, we might take out our hair and put on our comfy clothes, or we might just look a hot mess before we even walk out that door. That's our backstage. Or where we're looking completely stressed and panicked because we got to study for this test. But when we walk into that room, that's our front stage, and we're going to be cool and collected and seem to have everything together. That's what he's talking about as far as derogatory, okay? So those are important. So understand the front stage, understand the back stage, that kind of thing. Now, Goffman also indicated something called the role performance, right? So this is a particular emphasis or interpretation that an individual gives a role. That's that person's style, in a sense, okay? Role conflict occurs when that expectation attached to that one role are incompatible with the expectations of another role. So there's a conflict between those roles in a sense. Role strain refers to conflicts that someone feels within a role. Okay, so let me back up here so you guys fully understand. Look at this slide. Let's say you are the son or daughter of somebody. We talked about all these different roles we take on. We're the friend, the student, the worker, right? But let's say all on this one day, all of a sudden, we now have different obligations, right? We got to visit mom. She's in the hospital. Now, I'm also supposed to be a really good friend to somebody, and they wanted me to come to their 21st birthday party. That same day, right, I have to also prepare to go to an exam the following day, so I really need to take care of that if I want to be a really strong student. And of course, my work decided they wanted to call me in for emergency overtime. That's that role conflict in that sense, okay? Role conflict. On the other hand, a role strain, again, if you recall, refers to conflicts that someone feels within a role. So, you are the student, right? You want to do well in your class, but at the same point in time, you don't want to make the other students feel bad, like they don't know anything either. Again, that's a role strain. Does that make sense between the two? Role conflict, you have multiple roles, maybe various different obligations within that role, expectations, all at the same time, thus having a conflict between those roles, role conflict. Role strain refers to the conflicts that someone feels within a particular role. So just one role, you as a student, might feel a strain between that. And so here that's giving you some kind of, again, a role strain. Okay? Now, let me jump back up here. Impression management is the person's efforts to manage somebody's impressions that others receive of him or her. So look at this cartoon, right? Both individuals and organizations do impression management. So trying to communicate messages about the self or organization that best meets their goals. At times these efforts fail, right? So in this cartoon, we have this guy, right? Phil, he's blowing his interview before he even sits down. This is for MapQuest. Sorry, I'm late. It took me forever to find this place. Again, look at the place of location, MapQuest, right? And this guy here is not managing the impression he's perceiving to the employer in that sense, right? We all do impression management. Think about it. When you go on a first date, are you wearing your pajamas? Are you looking a little bit not to your best foot forward, right? We tend to do those impression managements because we want other people's perceptions of us to be slightly different in that moment, right? So again, impression management is something we tend to do. We tend to become the roles we play. Some roles become part of our self-concept. There are some when you leave a role like marriage or police work or the military, right? That it can become so intertwined that leaving it at times can really be a struggle within somebody's personal identity a lot of times. All right, let's go back up here. We're going to talk about 3 types of signed vehicles. Signed vehicles are used to communicate information about ourselves, right? Think about this. The first one is our social setting, right? So this is where the action unfolds, okay? This includes scenery, furnishings used to communicate messages, all that stuff, okay? The second is appearance. So how a person looks when he or she is playing that role. This can include props which decorate the person, and of course, the third one is manner. So these are the attitudes demonstrated as an individual plays his or her team. Okay? So what do I mean by this? Think about it. We have signs all the time around us, in a sense. A lot of times what we do is that Erving Goffman believed at the core of his approach is impression management and how people try to control other people's impressions of how they're seen through signed vehicles, right? We want to impress people in that sense, right? So maybe we buy a new car, a new flashy kind of car, right? That's going to sort of set it up. Or, we're going to be the ones that have nice clothes on or whatever the case is. That's all part of those impressions that we give with one another. Does that make sense? Okay. Or maybe even the attitudes that we give, how we talk, how we walk, how we interact with other people. That's all part of those signed vehicles. Okay. Teamwork. Teamwork is when 2 or more players work together to make a performance go off as planned. It shows that we're sort of adept players in that sense. We do teamwork all the time, whether it's something as minor as just quintessentially you're doing something with a group of individuals, right? Maybe you're working as a team at a fast food restaurant, right? Everybody's got to sort of play their parts. Everybody sort of got to hold up to their accountability in order for that day's work to sort of go off as hitched, right? Now we have something called face saving. A face saving technique here. So when things don't go off like we hope that they will, we might engage in something called a face saving behavior, right? We ignore flaws in someone's performance, quintessentially. Goffman defines that as the word tact, in a sense. So a face-saving technique, in a sense, could be used as a studied non-observance, where we might be completely ignore in order that neither person nor are going to face embarrassment, right? Oh, they tried their best, right? I know they didn't get all the fries in the fryer, but that's okay. They were really busy. They tried the best that they could. That kind of thing. That sort of face-saving technique, right? We're ignoring an error because maybe we want to avoid them being embarrassed, maybe because we don't want them to have to be upset, whatever that case is. Impression management occurs within families, businesses, college, even the government, essentially. All right. Ethnomethodology involves the discovery of rules concerning our views of the world and how people ought to act. Ethnomethodologists try to uncover people's background assumptions, right, from the basic of one's reality and provide some type of those basic rules concerning our view of the world and how people ought to act. Think about that. Can you guys think of any examples of that? Harold Garfinkel founded the ethnomethodological approach. He utilized different experiments, asking subjects to pretend that they did not understand the basic rules of social life in order to uncover others' reactions and sort of break those background assumptions. I'm going to send you guys a picture in this discussion so that you guys can see it, an example of ethnomethodology, right? We have certain rules in our society that we know of how people should act and how people should behave in certain scenarios. That's all part of this. All right. So again, look for that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. The final thing that I want to talk about is the social construction of reality. This refers to what people define as real, right? Because everybody's background assumptions and life experiences are different. Symbolic interactionists believe that people define their own reality and then live within these definitions, in a sense. So Thomas Theorem, right? Thomas Theorem was W.I. Thomas and Dorothy S. Thomas. Believed if people define situations as real, they're real in their consequences, in their sense. Therefore, what does that mean? Our behavior does not depend on the objective existence of something, but on our subjective interpretation of our definition of reality, right? So we have this guy, James Henslin and May Biggs. They conducted research to show that when physicians are performing gynecological exams, they socially construct reality. So those exams are non-sexual in that sense, right? That's our construct of that reality in that sense. We're defining that situation as real, but then they have real in those consequences as well. We're defining those outlines of it. Does that make sense? To understand human behavior, we have to have both those social structures, macro and micro, those social interactions as well. Both are absolutely necessary for us to understand social life and fully because each adds to our understanding of human experience overall. It's important that we understand both micro and macro levels in this. Anything that we do influences human behaviors. We define things a lot of times. Let me go back and say this. Ethnomethodology, right? They're deeply embedded. These background assumptions in our life are so deeply embedded in everything that we do. Symbolic interactionists, looking at how that reality is subject by people's perceptions of what's real. Very important. At the same level, we look at macro sociology and we look at those social structures and how that sort of underlies our perceptions and our attitudes and behaviors. These are all extremely important for us to understand,